Yeah, no, good on you. Yeah, no. But anyway, are you good to go? I think cameras are
Well,
coming back on
we'll
again.
find out.
We'll find out. Yeah. I'm just buckling in. Okay, people. So our next presentation is from the wonderful Ewan Mochrie. Ewan's like many of the presenters this year, a master trainer of NLP and hypnosis, a trainer of timeline therapy and coaching, and runs his own practice. And he's a leadership coach working with people and businesses all over the world. He's very experienced, very committed, very engaging teacher. And by his own account, he has a very rare ability to captivate the audience, which we've already had a taste of earlier this evening. Absolutely so. And he has a lot of insightful learnings, which I'm looking forward to receiving in direct transmission, of course. So over the last 18 years, his trainings and workshops have helped thousands of people all over the world to improve their lives, achieve the goals. And that's how you achieve the best version of yourself. And that's part of his mission. His fast-paced corporate career that he's been through, he decided to push his passion for more positive change and launch his own NLP and coaching business in 2005. And since then, he's trained and coached thousands of people using these tools for personal mastery. He's known for storytelling, so I'm looking forward to what's he got to tell us today. He's known for his wit and his breadth of knowledge, as well as his dedication to proving to his students, providing to his students, sorry, his first class experience. Ewan is a trainer, and he has a charity that empowers veterans, which in itself is just wonderful to hear. Is any serving personnel and their families, of course, because they're also touched by the experiences. He enables them to manage their emotions and develop resilience, something that a lot of them need when they've been through experiences in the services. So more power to you for doing that, Ewan. His biggest passion in life is understanding the nature of reality and sharing that experience and understanding with others, which is partly why he's here today, of course. And to this end, he's published his own paradigm shifting book called It's Time, Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life, and Change Your World. So get out there onto Amazon and go and get yourself a copy of that. His podcast, which is called Just Two Things, reminds people that number one, you're responsible for your life, what you do with it, what you feel about it, and no one else is. It's on you. And number two, what you put out is what you get back. Somewhere, somehow, somewhen. Everyone, I hand the floor over to the wonderful Ewan Mochrie. Thank you, Ewan.
Well, thanks, Mark. That's a big build-up. So I better hope I live up to the expectations now. Well, first of all, before I start, I'd just like to do a big shout out for all the people in the UK who are up at the small hours of the morning at ridiculous time. So well done, chaps. Although I am from the UK, I am not in the UK today. I am in Sedona, Arizona, because I'm going to an event this weekend. So I won't be here, tomorrow and that sort of thing, because I'm attending an event as a delegate myself tomorrow. Now, I do have some slides as well, so you don't have to just sit there looking at me sitting in my hotel room. So let me just see if I can master the technology. It's always a challenge, but here we go. Now, what I'm going to start with, if I find the right button, is some holiday snaps. So as I said, here we are. I took this picture earlier this week. This is Bell Rock in Sedona. Now, it's nothing to do with what I'm talking about. I just thought I'd share the pictures because there's just a couple of quite nice pictures for those of you who don't know what Sedona is. It's quite a spiritual vortex, a collection of vortices. Apart from being visually very beautiful, quite stunning landscape, it's also quite a spiritual sort of center in the world. So it's quite a pleasure for me to be delivering this from Sedona today. So there's just two pictures. This is Bell Rock, and I've got another one of my holiday snaps. Here we go. This is Cathedral Rock. Now, I'd like to point at the screen. I point at the screen, but you can't see me pointing at the screen. So, but you see where the bits go vertical, where you can climb up to where they go vertical. You can't go up the vertical bits, but you can climb up to there. So I climbed up to there the other day, and there's stunning views across the rest of the valley from there. So I just thought I'd share those because I've been having a nice few days here in Sedona, and if any of you have not been, wondered what it's like, well, that's what it's like. Absolutely stunning. Uh, Now, what I'm going to talk about is not hypnosis. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about leadership and emotional intelligence. Now, the reason I'm going to talk about leadership and emotional intelligence is now it's not just my opinion. Oh, it definitely is my opinion, but it's not just my opinion. The world today is starved of good quality leadership. Um, Now, you can look at politics, you can look at business, you can other spirituality, and really we don't have enough good quality leadership right now. Now, one of the things that I want to do is do something to change that. Now, what I'm going to share with you as I go through is a simple leadership model and also talk about how EQ is important in a leadership context. Now, the other two other things that are important about talking about leadership is um, a lot of you guys here today, you are leaders. Now, you may be leaders in, different contexts, for sure. But part of what we're wanting to do here is to create more good quality leaders, and you guys are leaders. So just sharing a little bit of a model that I think all of you can maybe take something from should help. Now, the third reason to talk about leadership and emotional intelligence is, and Kim was talking about it before, and you're all probably getting a sense of it. You get a sense of it anyway. And I was thinking this before I started doing NLP. I think the world is going through quite profound change at this time. Now, everybody in the past probably thought they were living through epoch changing times as well, and maybe many of them were. Um, but I think today there is quite significant change going on, and that change is about understanding what reality is. That and we're getting closer to an understanding of that. But once we understand it, we've then got to incorporate it into our behavior. Now, leadership's been taught, very fairly effectively in the 20th century. But before that, people would just look at leaders from the past, and really where leadership theory started, it started with great man theory. That's what it was called, and it was based on people like Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great, the dashing young Macedonian king who defeated Darius or Darius, depending on how you want to pronounce it, the third of Persia, swept through Turkey, the Levant, took Egypt, went right across the Persian Empire, Afghanistan to the borders of India. So he created in a very short period of time, a huge empire certainly from a Greek perspective, all of the known world, not all of the world, obviously, but all of what they knew, and then promptly died. So he had no actual opportunity to show any of his maybe weaker characters later in life or anything like that, because he had massive achievement and then died at the peak, which is often the best way to go, is you go out at the top. Well, Alexander the Great certainly did that. Now, the other person who often gets talked about in a leadership context is Gaius Julius Caesar. Now, he was the chap that changed the Roman calendar. I don't know if any of you have noticed this, but if you look at in English, if you look at the way the months are numbered and described, so September is the ninth month, but it's sept from the Latin for seven. And October is the 10th month, but it's from the Latin for eight. November is the ninth month, but it's from the Latin for nine. And December is the 12th month, but it's from the Latin for 10. Now, one of the things that Julius Caesar did is he put in 2 extra months into the Roman calendar because it had 10 months. Now, I'm offended by a couple of things about that. One is when they were naming the months in the first place, could they not think of anything more imaginative than calling some of them 7, 8, 9, and 10? That's really lacks imagination. The other thing that offends me about it, if you're going to stick 2 extra months in, why wouldn't you put them in at the end and keep the numbers going? Why did you stick them in and now all the numbers are out of sequence? Anyway, that was one of the things that Caesar did, because the Roman calendar was getting out of sync with the seasons because they only had 10 months. So he brought in, it was based on an Egyptian model. We brought that in. And that was the Julian calendar, and that was only slightly changed for the ones that we use today about 1500 years later. It was only a very small change that was made to it. What he also did was conquered Gaul, and then he was instrumental in ending the Roman Republic when he famously took his armies over the Rubicon and created a civil war in Rome. And he also had a child with Cleopatra as well, so he certainly was getting around a little bit. Now, at the start of the 20th century, the Russia, as it was then, had a Tsar, and Germany had a Kaiser. Now, the word Tsar for the sort of king of Russia and Kaiser, king of Germany, they are derived from Caesar's name. That was how strong his influence was on people all the way through up until, moving into the 20th century. When Napoleon crowned himself, when he became emperor, he modeled himself on Julius Caesar. So a lot of leadership up until into, later 20th century was really based on this idea of great man theory. And it was assumed that great leaders were just born that way. There was nothing you could particularly do about it. You were either an Alexander the Great or a Julius Caesar or a Hannibal Barca if you were like your Carthaginians, or you just didn't have the qualities. Now, what was then realized was, well, hang on a minute, these are just behaviors. These people are doing behaviors. Maybe we can do, maybe it's traits. And then people would look at the context that maybe leaders were leading in. Maybe need different leadership style here or different leadership style there. Now, one of the things that's really quite apparent these days is I'll go through exactly what emotional intelligence is in a minute, but it's emotional intelligence which is key to good, effective leadership. Now, just to give you a quick slide on leadership, it's just really a quote. This is my favorite quote on leadership. This is from Dwight Eisenhower. Now, if you want to study 20th century leaders, then Dwight Eisenhower is quite a good one to study. Now, he said in this quote, he said, leadership is the art of getting other people to do what you want done because they want to do it. Now, it's fundamentally an influencing job that you're doing. Another way of thinking about leadership is managing change. It's the art of managing change. Now, what's often said about leadership, it's a bit like beauty. It's very difficult to describe what it is, but you know it when you see it, good quality leadership. Now, what I want to do is sort of break down what makes a good leader so that it's something that you can learn yourself and you can apply in what you're doing in a leadership role. Now, I'll go through the model shortly. What I'll just do before that is just have a little chat about emotional intelligence. Now, IQ is your intelligence quotient. That's what it gets, because its quotient just means a number you can describe it through. So you can measure how smart you are. You can do an IQ test, and IQ tests are often about, can you manipulate 3D objects? Can you solve this little puzzle? And, how smart are you? Have you got an IQ over, I don't know what the number is, 130 something or something? You can join Mensa, so are you a really smart person? Now, as the quote, this is Nancy Gibbs as a journalist, as she said about IQ and EQ. She said, IQ will get you hired for a job in the first place, your IQ, but it's your EQ that's going to get you promoted. So EQ stands for emotion quotient. So it's your emotional intelligence. It's a measure of that. Now, over the years, since we've been doing, not me personally, but people have been doing IQ tests for about 100 years now, and people have been getting smarter. Now, it's called the Flynn effect in psychology. Are people really getting smarter, or are we getting better at doing IQ tests? Now, I read this next bit on the internet, so it must be true. What I've seen recently is apparently IQ in America has been going down in recent years, although that surely seems difficult to believe. But anyway, now I'll go through the detail of what emotional intelligence is in a sec, but it was popularized by Daniel Goleman. Some of you may have heard of Daniel Goleman. He was a science writer, and he wrote a book in the 90s called Emotional Intelligence. And basically, it was him who was promoting the idea of it. Now, he didn't really describe it in this way. I'll show you this slide now, but he didn't describe it in this way. But this is the easiest way to understand it. Now, what I'd say about emotional intelligence, if you chunk it up about what it's about, it's your It's your ability to manage and understand yourself and manage and understand other people. Basically, in leadership, you lead through people, not over people. George Patton, who some of you again will know, was an American general in World War II, well known for his aggressive approach, did have a bit of a problem with anger and that sort of thing. Now, during the First World War, he was in charge of American tank regiments, very at the nascent beginning of tanks in the First World War. And at one point, he actually hit one of his own soldiers over the head with a spade. Now, Eisenhower later said, now he was obliquely referring to Patton when he said this. He said, hitting people over the head with a spade is assault. That's not leadership. So what Eisenhower was good at doing was managing through people. Now, that utilizes emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence is really an important thing in business. Aside from leadership, it's an important thing in business these days. A lot of companies are actually recruiting people basically on their emotional intelligence, because they can teach, if you're smart enough at the job, they're not just taking anybody off the street, they're emotionally intelligent. But if you're moderately smart enough to do the job, and if you can get along with other people, broadly, emotional intelligence, then they can teach you the job. They can teach the technical skills of doing the job, but you need to have emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence is essential in leadership in the modern world. Now, I'll go through, this is broadly what emotional intelligence is about. Now, one of the important things about emotional intelligence is you can learn emotional intelligence. So we all maybe start out with a certain amount of it, but you can learn it and you can get better at it. Now, this is one of the things about leadership as well. You can learn leadership. So it's more about a nurture thing rather than a nature thing. But one of the things you're learning is you're learning emotional intelligence. Now, the other thing about NLP is that NLP improves your emotional intelligence. When I do leadership training for companies, I teach them NLP within a leadership framework, because the NLP improves your emotional intelligence. Broadly speaking, then emotional intelligence, we go through these quadrants. So the four quadrants you got here often use slightly different headings when I teach you, but I've got this slide, so I'm going to use this slide. Otherwise, I would have had to create another one, and that's way beyond my capabilities. But anyway, so it starts off with self-awareness. So, well, you got self-awareness, you got social awareness, which is awareness of others, really, self-management, leadership management of others, slightly different headings. But anyway, so self-awareness. So it starts off with self-awareness. So what are you good at? What are you not so good at? Could you honestly do a SWOT analysis on yourself? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I often say strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunities, but that wouldn't be a SWOT analysis. That would be a SWOTO analysis or something. It wouldn't quite work. But anyway, so can you actually look at what your strengths and your weaknesses are? Honestly, can you honestly do that for yourself? Are you aware of your own emotions when you're actually experiencing emotions? Can you take feedback? We don't always like to get feedback, but can you actually take feedback and listen to it, take it on board, see if it's reasonable or not? And do you not take yourself too seriously? That's another thing which I think filters over into many aspects of life. You know, I don't think we should all take ourselves too seriously. Just a little bit, but not too seriously. Now, one of the important things about self-awareness is all change starts with self-awareness. You cannot help anybody get over a problem they don't think they have. So if you're going through any sort of change for somebody else or for yourself, it has to start with self-awareness. Now, once you've looked at the idea of self-awareness, the next quadrant is then, it's called here social awareness, but it's really awareness of others. So if you've got strengths and weaknesses, maybe other people do too. If you think about the world in a certain way, maybe other people think about it in a different way, and maybe different's okay. It's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just different from how you do it. So that's sort of the beginnings of your awareness of other people, but it's really about empathizing with people too. Can you put yourself in the shoes of somebody else? Can you properly listen to somebody? What a lot of people listening do is they're not actually listening to the other person speaking. They're waiting for the other person to stop speaking so they can talk about the nearest similar thing that's happened to them compared to what the speaker was talking about. That's listening to reply. That's not actually listening. Oh, you went to school. I went to school too. Can you believe it? What a coincidence. That's really funny. Now, also, awareness of others is also in an organization. If you're in an organization, you run an organization, it's also looking at where are the power structures in the organization? What actually makes the organization work? If you come into a bunch of people, can you actually tell how they're getting on? This is really an important thing if you do trainings in businesses. When you go into a business, you've got to look at what's the relationship between the people in the room that I've got. Sometimes I'll do training, you get a mixed sort of different seniorities and that sort of thing. So who's paying attention to who? When somebody speaks, who's paying attention to it, who's not paying attention to it, because you can look at the power dynamics. Now, that's part of your awareness of other people. Now, the next category is self-management. Now, self-management in simple terms is making sure you turn up when you're supposed to turn up and you do what you're supposed to do. So I've been working now for several hundred years, it feels like, and I haven't found anything more simple to keep yourself organized in business than having a diary with your appointments in it. Second point with having a diary is you need to look at it. That's where I often fell down. I had a diary with appointments in it and then wouldn't look at it. But anyway, and then you have a to-do list and you do the things on your to-do list. You might prioritize them. And I haven't found anything better than that. You just kind of need to do that. So people talk about time management. Well, it's really managing yourself. It's not really managing time. There's the same amount of time in the day for everybody. So you're really managing yourself. But anyway, now, self-management also includes emotional control. Do you make sure you don't let out your slightly more destructive emotions at inappropriate times? So that's also a part of it. Is your glass are you optimistic? Is your glass slightly more half full than half empty? Can you be proactive? You're not waiting for things to happen. You're going to make things happen. These are all aspects of self-management. So what you've got is awareness of self, awareness of others, and self-management. Now, the final category then is, it says on this slide, it says relationship management, but it's often described as leadership and management of other people. Now, to do the last quadrant, you need to make sure you're effective in all the other three so that you can do the last one. You can't do the last one effectively if you can't do the other three. You've got to be able to do that as well, those as well. Now, in isolation, though, leadership and management of other people in this model, in an emotional intelligence model, is about can you develop other people? Can you look at somebody else and see what their development needs are? Can you motivate a bunch of people? Are you able to do that? Can you inspire people and motivate them? Can you resolve conflict between individuals or bunches of people? These are all aspects. Now, the leadership stuff that I'll go through takes leadership concept a little bit deeper, but it's fundamentally these sorts of things. It's application of the other three quadrants with a bunch of people. It's the leadership and management of others. Now, you may have varying experience of this. One of the things I've found with corporations over the years is, although it seems to be changing now from what I was saying before, but often they've not taught these slightly softer skills. They haven't really understood or seen the value in them, and they're not taught. Or not taught well enough anyway. And what would often happen, I worked as an accountant before. That's what I did before I moved into NLP. Now, what they'd often do is, if you were a good accountant, they would promote you because you were a good accountant, but they wouldn't give you the managerial skills. They would just assume that you can manage other people because you can do the job of being an accountant, but it's a completely different skill set. This is one of the things about it. Through my development, I can see that really before I started doing NLP, my emotional intelligence wasn't that high, to be honest, actually. I'll tell you a couple of stories about a company that I used to work in, but I joined a travel business. So I'll tell you a little bit about that in a bit. But I joined a travel business about 22, 24 years ago, something like that, maybe about 20, 21, let's say. Let's go for that. So more than that. About 22 years ago, joined a travel business as the finance director. Now, It had about 300 staff in the call center. So it was a travel call center. We were travel agents, so people would phone up and we'd try and sell them holidays and that sort of thing. Now, the woman that managed the sales staff, she had 300 sales staff. She used to come into my office and tell me stuff that was happening with the staff because she thought I needed to know about it. And I probably did need to know about it. She told me whose sales performance was up, whose sales performance was down, who had fallen out with who was sleeping with who was on drugs. We did have a problem with that sometimes, and who was, having too much alcohol and all the rest of it. So she would tell me all this information. Now, talking to me, it's very difficult to show it on the screen, but I'll do the best I can. I used to put my hand up in her face like that while she was talking to me because I like thinking about things. I'm a little bit more auditory digital and I like to think about things. And I had to think about all the things she was just telling me, but she was still talking. So I had to stop the flow of information. Now, she gave me some feedback that maybe that wasn't such a good thing to do. And to be fair, it wasn't really such a good thing to do, but I didn't even know I was doing it. This is the self-awareness. I didn't even know I was doing it until she pointed out to me that I was doing it, let alone think about what the impact on her was of me doing it. So this is what I mean about emotional intelligence. It is something which I think you can learn. I'd like to think you can learn. And one of the ways to learn it is by understanding NLP. That's learning that. That's one of the ways to do it. Now, what I'll start going, so what I want you to do is just hold, as I go through the next section, what I want you to do is just hold this idea about emotional intelligence in it as I go through. Now, I'll point out some bits as I go through the leadership stuff, and it probably features in as well, but just bear it in mind. Now, the leadership model that I'll go through, I call it a dynamic leadership model. It's not that it's dynamic in that it's changing the world necessarily, although it could. It's more that it's a flexible, changing thing, that it's a dynamic, changing process that you're in. Leadership is not a fixed thing. It's a process that you're going through. Now, where it comes from is this model is based on work by a chap called Warren Bennis. I don't know if any of you have heard of Warren Bennis, but it's based on work by him. Now, basically, I've summarized here what he says. Now, how he came up with this is he studied 90 leaders. This was in the late 90s, start of the 21st. Is that the century we're in now? Start of the 21st century. And he studied 90 leaders from business, from sports, from the media, from arts and entertainment, from politics. So it was a complete broad section of leaders that he looked at. And basically, he found successful leaders had common things about them. Now, so I've condensed some of this down so it's a workable model that people can sort of hold on to. So I'll do that now. So the four components of it are these. Now I'll go through each of these in turn, but these are the four components. It's the context that you're leading people in. It's your vision, which is usually based on the context. It's about your followers, and it's about the leader themselves. Now, let me move just straight into context then. Now, I'll put up the bits on this in a sec, but just so you understand what context is. Now, context can vary depending upon what you're doing. So context is about the environment in which you're leading. So take the call center business I was talking about before. If you're a team leader in that call center business, you've maybe got 5 or 6 people that you're the team leader of, right? Now, what they're doing is they're selling. So the context you've got is your team. Some of your context is the systems. What's the computer system? How old are you? But what are the computer systems that your people are using? What are they actually like? What's the management around you? What's the management above you? And what some of the other teams around you? That's some of the context. What your customers like? So that your team is going to be interacting with customers and selling together. What are they like? That's some of the context that you got as well. Now, you probably, as a team leader in that environment, you probably want to understand and have been on holidays. One of the things they used to do was educationals, and they'd send people away so they knew what it was like at the other end, what they were selling, so they got an understanding of what they're selling. So you need to understand that too. All of those things are the context for the team leader. Now, if you're running the business, so I did for a while, I joined as a finance director, then I ran it for a while. Now the context is different then. So you've got some of that context is still there, but what happens is you expand out the number of stakeholders that now is part of your context. So what I then had is I've got the finance team and the particular rules that you have around travel, and the VAT rules are different. Some of the tax rules are different. And then you've got the marketing team. That's some of the context. You've got the sales team. You've got the technology side of the business. You've got more technology for you to consider than just the systems that the staff are using. It's like, well, could be using different systems. It's not just managing with what you've got. Is this the best thing that we could be using for the organization? You've also got the investors. Who are the investors? You've got the other interested parties who are on the board and that sort of thing. So had the board of the managing director of an airline was one of the people on the board, and that's so your context gets broadened out. Now, what we also had in that business at this, so this is beginning early 21st century. What you've got is you've got the beginning of the internet is coming in as a way to sell holidays. Now, what we've been doing before, now if I describe this to you, most of you will think, especially some of the younger people, you'll think this is nuts and you won't believe it. And if you're not from the UK, you might not quite understand it. But what we used to do, this is how we used to get business, is we had something called teletext in the UK. Yes, that's right, Mark. It was teletext. And how it worked is so archaic, it's unbelievable. You would have, say 16 pages of holidays, and you would have about 20 lines or 24 lines of just text. Now, you went on a particular channel on the TV, you could see that text, but you've got absolutely no control over it. You can't search on it, and if you've 16 pages, that first page, if you saw a holiday on there, oh, quick, write the phone number down. But what would happen? It would move on to the next page then. And you had to wait for it to go through all 16 pages before you could go back to the page where the holiday was that you wanted. And what you also had to do as a business, you had to advertise things on there which would get people to phone up. Oh, look, we'll go to Malaga for 180 quid each. So you phone up and then you find out it's actually in October and it's flying from Luton. Oh, I live in Manchester. There's no point going to Luton. So, but you've got to actually have that. But what you're aiming to do is to get people interested so they'll phone up so you can sell to them. Now, the conversion rate that we had in that business, now I said it was great. Other people did better, who knows? But the conversion rate we had on that was between 6 and 8%. So between 6 and 8% of calls were turned into a sale. Now, what was beginning then was the internet as well. Now, that totally changed how the travel business was working, because what the customer was doing, they were doing the search. Instead of the staff doing the searching, the customer now does the searching on the internet. And then what we found is the conversion rate went, it probably should have been higher than this, but the conversion rate went up to about 25% off the internet then, because you're doing more of just order taking. But what you found is the number of calls were going down. So we were working through this transition period. So that's some of the context that you've got to understand. Now, one of the things that Warren Bennett says about leaders is a leader needs to master the context. If you don't master the context that you're working within, the context is going to master you. So you need to really understand that. Leaders master the context, that's what it says. Now, just so you understand the difference between leadership and management. Now, as a leader, you often do management as well. So it's not like you never do management. You often do a bit of management as well. But a manager surrenders to the context, whereas a leader needs to master the context. The manager just works, this is the context. I need to understand it, but I work within it. Whereas the leader is going to stand back and they're going to think, right, okay, because this is the context, maybe we need to do something slightly different then. Stakeholder symmetry, this is one of the things that I mentioned briefly before, is you've got to manage all the stakeholders that are involved. They've got competing interests. How do you manage those competing interests? Now, there's a couple of things here. It's difficult to describe, but do the best you can with the words. What a leader does is they work on the spiritual fabric of an organization. Now, one of the ways of thinking about that is the values of an organization. So what's the general ethos? What's the culture? The leaders working with the culture and the values in the organization. One of the things I did in that business is I changed the values in the business because that was one of the things that I wanted to help move the business forward, was have the values that were right. So we did a survey of the staff, asked them what they thought the values were. and it was totally different than what they should be and what I thought they were. And then we had to do a program of deciding what the values were, and then rolling it out to the staff. And when you do that, some people left. Hooray! Hey, those are the people we wanted to leave, because we're changing the culture of the business, and some people find that they don't fit in then. So this is what one of the things that leadership is about. Now, what managers do is they work on the material resources of an organization. Now, as a leader, you're still going to do some of that. Some of your job is still management, but that's one of the ways to distinguish it. Think about the leader more as this, understanding the overall context and the interplay of all the different characters involved, and thinking about, the social fabric of the organization and being in charge of setting what that is. And then managers work within the systems and processes underneath that. Now, connected with context is the next bit, which is vision. Once you understand the context that you're operating in, you then need to form a vision and articulate your vision to people. Now, I'll just put a few of these bits up and just have a little chat through these. I think that's the last one on this. So you need to get a clear vision. That comes from your understanding of the context. Now, it can be very simple, or it could be completely earth-shattering sort of vision that you've got. But you come up with a vision, and then flexibility is important for sure. But when it comes to your vision, you need to be happy your vision's right, and you stick to what your vision is. Now, I'll talk about the last couple of points in a minute. Just an example on this. An example I quite like on this is Winston Churchill. Now, man for his times, nobody's perfect, and Winston Churchill certainly wasn't perfect. But what Britain actually managed to achieve during World War II at the beginning was leadership. So to begin with, through Winston Churchill, Britain didn't really provide much in the way of war-winning capability in the Second World War. If you look at German casualties in World War II, between 70 and 80% of German casualties in World War II were on the Eastern Front. So World War II was largely Germany against Russia. But what Britain provided at the beginning, and America took it over then in really about 43 sort of time, was leadership. And that was through the efforts of Winston Churchill. Now, what he understood the political context of the world in the 1930s and early 1940s, 1930s. Right? And the context then was you had you had authoritarian regime. So obviously you had fascist regime in Germany, Italy, and Spain. And in Russia, you had the Soviet bloc. Now, the Soviet Union. Now, they're both pretty much the same. This is one of the things that's quite remarkable about history is if you look at Stalinist Russia and if you look at Nazi Germany, they're not really that much different. They maybe wear slightly different clothes and use slightly different language, but it's the same stuff at the end of the day. But what Churchill understood was the only way that now, when I say free, Churchill was still a bit of an imperialist, so Britain was not freeing other parts of the world like India. But anyway, let's leave that to one side for a moment. For the free world, Churchill realized that the only thing you could do with fascism was implacable opposition to it. Now, prior to him taking over the leadership in the UK, Britain and France had appeased Hitler up to that point, and they had not fully understood the leaders then hadn't understood the context. Winston Churchill understood the context. Now, this was the vision that he then stuck to. He only took over Prime Minister in the UK in about the early May 1940. So this was when Germany was launching its attack on France, Netherlands, and Belgium, and Norway, and that sort of thing. So Winston Churchill took over at that time. Now, he delivered a series of speeches. One of the speeches he's famous for delivering was delivered the day after Dunkirk. So Dunkirk was when British and the elements of the first French army were evacuated from the French port of Dunkirk. Now, the day after that, Winston Churchill in the House of Commons, he delivered a speech, which some of you might, I've got a little quote from it here. This was we shall fight them on the beaches, we'll fight them on the landing grounds, we'll fight them in the fields, in the streets, and we shall fight them in the hills, and we shall never surrender. That was basically his vision. That was the vision that he then implacably stuck to. So this is when I say, yeah, you can have flexibility. You got flexibility underneath that, but when you got a clear idea what your vision is, you stick to that. And you've got to hope it's right. You've got to hope it's right. But if you've understood the context, then maybe you're going to be right. Now, what you want to do with your vision is it needs to create enthusiasm for the people that hear it, and you need to make sure your vision is delivered through persuasion. So you don't deliver a vision through diktat, you deliver it through persuasion. One of the key things of leadership is it empowers people underneath. It's actually real power in leadership comes from empowering other people. And when you empower other people, when you've understood the context, when you have a vision, then you can actually achieve great things. If you look at the D-Day landings, then this is what Eisenhower, well, Churchill through, Eisenhower and all the rest of it, that's what they did. There was hundreds of thousands of people involved in that. They all understood what they were doing. Now, maybe when they're on the beaches and they're under fire, they're fighting for their own life and they're fighting for the people next to them, but they still at some level understand why they're there and what their contribution is, and everybody else is on the same page. And that's when you've got a clearly understood context, clearly articulated vision, then you can execute, which is what they then managed to do eventually. Now, the next bit is then followers, right? Now, I'm not talking about on TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, but my daughter says I should be on TikTok, but I don't understand it. Do you need to have a little dance or something? Is that what you do? But it's not about being on TikTok or Instagram, having followers on there. It's actual real followers. If you don't have any followers, then you're not leading anybody. You're just leading yourself, which is fine. You can lead yourself, but if you're a real leader, you need to have people that are following you. Now, the way to look at followers is they want to be associated with success and they want to do a good job. Now, they're really going to follow you because they believe that the vision that you articulate is right for the times and it's right for them. Now, where you can get charismatic leadership, this is one of the problems, dare I say, that we have in the world, certainly did in the UK a few years ago. One of the problems we have is when you get charismatic leaders, then it's not the vision that's important, it's the leader that becomes important. So you've got a disconnect, and the followers are following the leader rather than following the vision. Now, that's a problem because it's not about the leader. It's about something other than the leader. It's not about something it was on the slides, but I didn't mention it. It's really your vision needs to be something greater than you, something connected, something greater than the organization, greater than yourself, and everybody can connect with that. So the leader per se isn't what's important. It's the vision that's important, articulated by the leader. Now, charismatic leaders is when you're actually the followers are following the leader because they think there's something special about them rather than the vision. And that's, still a problem we have at the minute. Now, what a leader needs to do is make sure the followers are provided with all the resources that they need to be able to do the job. This is where you start. It's not where you start. You can use EQ and some of the rest of it, but this is where you really need to put yourself in the shoes of the people that are working for you. One of the things that we used to do in the travel business is every quarter, the girl that I mentioned who was in charge of all the staff, she used to get the managers to compete against the staff selling holidays. So she'd get the managers to go on the phones. Now, what you then do is you're doing the job that they were doing. So you understand the systems. You've got to make sure that one of the things I discovered when I was useless at it, but one of the things I discovered when I attempted to do that was the systems the staff were using were really difficult to use. And that's something I hadn't appreciated until I attempted to start selling holidays myself. I think I sold one flight. I think that's all I managed to do when I did that. So as a leader, you need to make sure you provide the management processes, the systems, the hardware that people need, the building spaces, whatever it is. You need to make sure you're providing that so that they can do the job. You can't expect people to do the job if you don't give them the resources to do it. Now, people will maybe cope without the resources for a while, but you need to make sure they're supplied. You want to have recognition for effort too. Another thing which I was amazed that we were doing this when I joined the call center to begin with is, again, it was probably about every quarter there would be a party, and the staff would go out, and we had to pay for it. Company had to pay for it. I was like, what we pay for this for? But what it is, it's a recognition for the effort that people were putting in. It's maybe why we had a problem with drinking and people sleeping with each other. I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't have been doing that. Anyway, but it's you've got to recognize where people have been putting effort in. Now, you allow flexibility, and you want a no blame culture, ideally. Now, you still need to manage poor performance. I'm not saying you don't manage poor performance. And when it comes to giving people flexibility, you have to give it within a framework so that you don't have catastrophic errors. So this is where you've got to make sure you set the management structure up right, so that people have the right sort of scope and responsibilities, so that that can't happen. But they've got to learn. You learn by making mistakes. There was one business that I can't remember where I read about this, but there was an executive, it was a big multinational, and one executive had bought a company for 3 million and it hadn't worked out. They'd lost all the money on it. And somebody asked his boss, well, you're not going to sack him? And his boss said, well, I'm not going to sack him. I've just spent £3 million educating him. So you will make mistakes, but you've got to make sure the mistakes people are making are not going to break the company. So you've got to set the right sort of framework for this. Again, it's a story that many of you won't remember, but there was a chap in the 90s in the UK called Nick Leeson. Now, Nick Leeson broke a merchant bank called Barings Bank. And he wasn't defrauding the bank himself. He was just trying to make a little bit of extra money for the business. And it ran out of control. And he started laying on bigger bets and bigger bets and bigger bets until he lost everything. Now, all the managers in the UK realized was Nick Leeson's making some money. This is how it went to begin with. Now, Nick Leeson shouldn't have been making so much money. He was just playing an arbitrage on the system. So he shouldn't really be making that much money. But in the UK, all the managers in the UK and the leaders in the UK were, oh, great, isn't Nick Leeson doing very well? Look, we can pay ourselves a bigger bonus. What they should have been saying is, hang on a minute, why is he making more money? He shouldn't be making that much money. And then eventually he broke the bank. But if you've got a no-blame culture, then people will learn. That's the idea about it. And they'll be prepared to make mistakes and learn from them. But if you have a culture where there's a lot of blame, then people will be frightened to take risks, even, acceptable risks. And I mentioned this before, but what you want to do as the leader, you want to empower people. As I said before, that's where the real power in leadership comes from, is empowering other people. It's not holding on to the power yourself. You've got to devolve it down. Now, the next bit is about the leader. Now, there's quite a lot on this slide. I thought I'll just fit it all in on one page. It's a bit of a lot, really. And that's supposed to say chief. It might say chef, but it's supposed to be chief. Be a chef if you like, I suppose. But... So we're going to break this down into sort of skills and something else, and then something else. We'll do skills first because I can see that. So we'll do that first. Now, skills are things that you can learn. So you can teach and learn them. So emotional intelligence is one of them. Because as I said, you need the emotional intelligence to manage through people, lead through people, not over them. Now, an aspect of emotional intelligence anyway is communication. Now, this is something which NLP is really important for. One thing that Tad put me onto, although I had noticed it myself, but one thing Tad put me onto several years ago was looking at Barack Obama's speeches. Now, I could hear in his language when he was running for president in the first place. But if you go through a Barack Obama speech, well, his speechwriters were trained in NLP. That's I don't know if Barack Obama was himself, but his speechwriters definitely were. Yeah, right. So, and this is where you use NLP in communication. It's because leaders are influencing. And you can just take one of his speeches and you can just go through. You can see all the reframing in it. You can see the use of ambiguous language. It's all there. It's a very good educational tool to do that. You also need to have good presentational skills. You will have seen leaders in one thing about leadership in business is the further on you progress in business, the less you do and the more you get paid. Now, what you're getting paid for is the leadership. You're also getting paid to hold on to ideas and manipulate in a positive sense, turn them around, look at them from different perspectives. That's what you're getting paid for. But you then need to communicate. Now, if you've seen a leader in business who can't present, it's a bit demotivating. But when you've seen a leader in a business who can present, then, that's really quite motivational. So presentation skills are vitally important in leadership. This is what trainers training teach you presentation skills. And an aspect of that is storytelling. That is an aspect of it. People learn best through story structure. They retain information best through story structure. Also, what story does is it works with this social fabric of an organization, because you can tell stories about the organization, stories about the people in the organization, stories about people the organization is helping. And all of that's really very important. Coaching, vital tool for any leader, because you want to develop people. Coaching develops skills in other people. You can teach people things, sure, but you won't develop potential unless you use coaching. Now, the next bit talks about character. Now, I've had debates with people about whether you can teach character or not. Some people think you can. Some people think it's a bit more innate. You have to make up your own mind on this one, I'm afraid. Ethics, you can do whole degrees in ethics. You can do a philosophy degree specifically in ethics. So I can't really teach that in the next couple of minutes. But ethics is really, and integrity is kind of the same thing, really. I can give you a couple of examples of bad ethics. Boris Johnson, that we had in the UK as our leader a few years ago during the COVID, he was setting laws for people to follow about social distancing and gatherings and that sort of thing. And then he was ignoring the same laws that he laid down for other people. That's not ethical. The accountancy firm that I worked with several hundred years ago was Arthur Andersen. So it was, at the time I worked for it, the largest accountancy. Some of you wouldn't have even heard of it because it went bust. But it was the largest accountancy firm in the world, bar none. It paid people more. People, we always prided ourselves, we're better than everybody else. Probably weren't, but anyway, thought we were. Now, the reason that Anderson's doesn't exist anymore is because it audited Enron. Now, again, some of you won't remember Enron, but Enron were making up profits. They would enter, there's the energy business, it would enter into a contract and it would imagine what the profits might be on this contract, which might last, 10, 15 years or something, and it would front load all the profit into the first year. Now, you just can't do that from an accounting perspective. That is just totally unacceptable. It's against all accounting standards. But Anderson's allowed them to do it. And then when it all started going a bit wrong, some of the Anderson's partners were caught shredding working papers. That's not ethical to shred your working papers. And they had their audit license revoked and the company went bust. As simple as that. Just as simple as that. It's staggering, really. Integrity is kind of the same sort of thing. Somebody, I can't remember who it was, but somebody defined integrity as doing the right thing even when somebody isn't watching. Now, when, nobody's watching, but you still do the right thing. But what does the right thing mean? Well, that's when you get into ethics, I suppose. Now, one thing I want you to notice about the word integrity, it actually is derived from integration. Now, integration is about connecting things together. So integrity comes from this idea of connectivity, which that's another important sort of thing that runs forward in the world at the minute. But anyway. Now, the last bit is then qualities. Now, qualities, it's not kind of skills. It's just kind of things that you kind of do, sort of. Now, resilience is, you all understand what resilience is. It's bounce back ability. So, you're maybe dealing with lots of things, but you can still cope with it all. You're not going to let your emotions out too much. Yes, you might be a little bit stressed, but you can still treat people fairly consistently. Consistency is another word. You can treat them fairly consistently because you are resilient. Consistency is then, it's about treating people the same. And you want to be the same person every day when people come to see you. Because that's kind of what they expect from you. You need to be outcome focused. says prepared to take risks. I talked a little bit about risk taking before. You will need to take risks. This is one of the things that I discovered about marketing. The problem with marketing is you don't know whether it works or not until you do it. So what you want to do with your marketing is don't put all of your money into one thing because you don't know whether it's going to work or not. What you got to do is you got to test it out. Over the years, I've tested out lots of things. I did a mail drop once. And do you know how many bookings we got? We got none. We got no bookings from it. But I didn't do it again. But I did it once just to try it out. Went to a conference once as well. I thought, well, God, they're quite expensive to go to. We have a stand and all that. So we did that once. I thought we got no bookings from that. But then 3 years later, somebody came on the course and said she'd met a business partner at the conference. I was like, oh my God, we did get a booking out of it. It did actually pay for itself. But it took me about 3 years to figure out that it did pay for itself. So you will need to take risks, but you've got to make sure you're not taking, basically all decisions made on incomplete information. So you're never going to have all the information you think you need to take a decision. You just have to take a decision based on the information you've got. Not making a decision is still making a decision. You've just decided not to make a decision. Now, again, I read this on the internet, so it must be true. After the financial crisis, there was a survey of companies, and it was 75%. Sounds made up. 75%. It kind of sounds a bit made up to me, but anyway. But 75% of companies said they'd made the wrong decision in the year after, they immediately following the financial crisis. But they said because they made a decision, they were still in business. There are a few decisions which once made you can't change if it's not working out. Now, another thing which Warren Bennis was very big on is this idea about learning all the time, constantly learning. Make your organization a learning organization so that it evolves and grows and it's not static. So the leader needs to be constantly learning too. Now, I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I'm just going to carry on anyway. So because I'm okay. 2. I don't know what 2 means. What's that? 2 minutes? 2 hours? How much longer have I got? 2 hours, right? I'll keep going. So I've just got a little bit on becoming a leader yourself. Now, Gandhi was saying this, so some of this idea really, you can trace some of it back into the mid 20th century. Now he said, I suppose leadership at one time meant muscles. That's like your great man theory sort of thing. But today it means getting along with people. This is the emotional intelligence piece. That's what that's about. So this is really for you thinking about your leadership role. Let me just see how much of this have we got. I think that's all on that. What I'd recommend you do is you do sort of a SWOT analysis on yourself at the beginning. Do a self audit. Have a look at yourself. Think about, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Where do you need to improve? Can you get some feedback? It's often painful. I must admit, it can be painful getting feedback, but it will help you improve. So can you get some feedback from people? Now, the one thing that always stuck with me that Tad said is the further on you progress in life, the harder it is to get decent feedback because who's going to give it to you? So you do have to bear that in mind. If you're getting feedback, then make sure it's from, don't necessarily take feedback from somebody you wouldn't seek advice from. It's that sort of thing. But see if you can get some. Painful though it may be, will help you improve. Now, the third point there says, think deeply about the sector you're in. You should be reading stuff all the time. Here, look, I've got 2 books that I brought with me on my trip to Sedona. One of them, even though I know quite a lot about Julius Caesar, is on Julius Caesar. It is that thick. That's quite thick. I'll just say that. It's about 600 odd pages. Right. So keep learning. Another one that I brought with me is about the end of the Nazi regime, 44 to 45. Now, my son laughs at me. He lives with me at the minute, and he laughs at the number of documentaries I watch about World War II and that sort of thing. But you can always learn something from it. You want to be constantly learning. This is what I do all the time. I like reading about history because you'll learn about leadership ideas from it. It's one of the reasons I keep doing it. So what Warren Bennett also said is you are your best teacher. Alexander the Great is his mentor, his sort of professor, if you like, was Aristotle. Now, we don't all have one of the world's greatest philosophers to teach us. Alexander the Great did, but we're not always blessed with that. But you are your best teacher, because you are the one that knows you the best, if you reflect on yourself a little bit. And when you develop past a certain point, as I said, where are you going to get the feedback from? So you have to become your best teacher. You want to be constantly learning and improving. Know that you will make mistakes. So I talked about that. And ultimately, being a leader means becoming yourself. What you're doing is you're growing into who you are. That's what leadership is about. You're becoming the true version of you. And, in all NLP sort of sense, the things you don't like about yourself, change it. And if you can't change it or you don't want to change it, then live with it, because that's who you are. As somebody once said, it just becomes your style. Now, I do have a little bit, more. I'm allowed a little bit more, Mark, or not? Yeah, right. Okay. It's only a couple of things. It's just a little thought on sort of future leadership. So it's not a lot. It's just a little bit. It's only 2 slides, although I might talk for ages, but we'll see what we can do. You'll just mute me. But anyway, so let me just, I won't go through all this because there'd be too much to go through, but it's just a little reminder about Clare Graves. Now, those of you who don't know who Clare Graves is, he was a psychology professor working through the sort of 50s and 60s, in particular, and 70s, died in 1986. And he was looking at mature personality, and this is taught in Master Prac in NLP. And he developed this model, which he called the emergent cyclical double helix model of adult biopsychosocial systems. Not very catchy. A couple of people wrote books afterwards called Spiral Dynamics, just a little bit catchier. But it's about the idea of how human consciousness evolves over time. And it's taught in NLP as sort of values levels. Now, one thing that, if you understand this system, what you'll realize about it is as you move up the values levels, the complexity of thinking increases. And what happens is you also start taking into account more of other people and other things as you move further up. Now, where we are today is we're moving into the higher level. They don't have the numbers on here, but the yellow one is 7. Yes, level 7, and turquoise one is level 8. We're moving further into these now. Now, what Clare Graves also said he said this, so let me just give you this. Really, in any sort of leadership situation, you've got to ask yourself the question, who should lead or manage whom to do what? Now, some leaders at the minute are getting a lot of followers, even if they don't really look like very good leaders to me, but it depends on how you see the world as to, who's going to follow you. Now, what Clare Graves also said is that leadership and management needs to come from further up in this spiral, the thing that was on the previous page, than where the people are. So you want to be pulling people further up as a leader, and the leadership shouldn't be coming from further down. Now, I could say stuff about just about every country in the world, but certainly in the UK, as I live in the UK, not today, but as I live in the UK, I can feel justified to say this. The leadership we've been having has been coming from further down this spiral than where the majority of the people are. That's a problem. Now, today's context, you will see it the way you see it. This is kind of the way I see it. This is what I plug from a book. This is what I wrote about in my book. All right. Did I tell you I'd written a book? Did I not mention it already? Can't believe I've not mentioned it already. Now, you want to ask, these are some of the questions that I was asking myself. Now, I've been exploring this sort of thing before I did NLP, because science didn't all quite make sense to me. And I had my own out-of-body experience in the 90s and started questioning the nature of reality. I went to the Monroe Institute. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Monroe Institute. Met people there who used to do remote viewing. Joseph McGonigal was one of the guys I met there. He used to do remote viewing for the US military. So I met him, and Skip Atwater was also there as well. And obviously, doing stuff like that makes you ask questions about the nature of reality. Now, you'll have your own view, but, these are sorts of questions you want to ask yourself. Now, where I've come to with it, and this is what I laid out, I won't go through the evidence for it, but they're laid out in the book, and this is why the book's called It's Time, is that time is an illusion. What's constant is change, not time. We measure change and call it time. Now, what that means is everything just exists now. Here and now, everything exists. Now, what that also means is everything is one thing. Now, from appearing to be many different things, like white light split into different sort of colors. Now, what that also, we have a dualistic experience. I have an experience of something. You have an experience of something. Now, what you're having an experience of, oh dear, I'm having a battery problem. So if I go over here, it's a bit dark, so I moved it, but let me just, almost done, but I would disappear otherwise, which Mark would probably be quite pleased about. But anyway, let me just do this. There we go. I'll plug myself in. But I'm in the dark now, but that's good. We're about to go. So we're going dark now. But what that means is what you put out is what you get back, because what you're seeing is a reflection. So that's why the podcast is just two things. What you put out is what you get back. Where's the real power lie? Well, it lies in you. But anyway, this is the last slide. You'll be pleased to know. So now these are very big picture. I'll go into a little bit more detail in the book about where we should be going, what the vision for where we should be going is. But really where you've got to start with is recognizing your spiritual nature. You've got to be careful how you say this. You don't have a soul. You are a soul. That's what you've got to be careful about saying. You have a body. That you're not in the world is in you. Existence is in you. But anyway, so these are kind of things we've got to do for the future. But it's a bit chunked up, but it's reconnect with nature. And we've got to take our technology with us. We've got to make it work in a symbiotic way with nature and with ourselves. But anyway, so I'll go into more detail about why it's like that and what the vision is in the book. But anyway, right, that's it. I'll stop now then. That's enough.
Ewan, it is, yeah. Ewan, your passion is written big, and thanks, and I'm sure everyone else has been completely fascinated by all of what you were saying. He mentioned Joe McMoneagle at the end. I do recommend having an experience of Joe McMoneagle. He absolutely is far out, and he totally doesn't sound like he is. He's a fascinating guy, and I did a number of his techniques based on what he was up to, and it's fascinating stuff. He was brought in as a special guest at an event that I was at to do an advanced modeling, which was just mind blowing. What can I say? Leadership is the art of getting people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. Sounds very Miltonian to me. I love the fact that it can all be learned, emotional intelligence. And one of the things I learned working in the film industry is that if you have a no blame culture, you deliver the film. Right. And it's always about where you're getting to, and it's never about the individuals involved in it. And we all had to do that. We all had to learn that. There's never a blame. I never worked on a single film that went from A to B in a straight line. It just totally didn't. It always went sideways. But we were flexible, right? The person with the most flexibility controls the systems, of course, as you know. And my rule number one is consistency. So I loved hearing that. I'm particularly happy about that. Folks, this has been a passionate debate opening speech, and I look forward to seeing it again and taking a lot of notes. I hope you do. He borrowed on our previous speakers' time, so I'll just remind other speakers to stay on time so that I don't yoink them off the stage. It's been fantastic though, and we did have the time, so I did let it go. We should have a quarter of an hour at this point before the next speaker, who I believe is going to be Christina Moyes. So people, take your comfort breaks, set your excitement to maximum,